Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session in the Laureus SportsLAB learning sessions. Today we are joined by 4 very exciting people doing incredible stuff throughout the world to discuss bridging the divide in sport and sustainable development. Just a very practical thing. Session, it will be recorded, and you, by remaining connected, will accept that we record and subsequently share the recording, which we hope to do on a dedicated website for these Laureus SportsLAB learning sessions and other types of learning events that we're trying to host going forward. For now, let's return to today's theme. Thank you for joining us. Recently, the Japan Sport Council and SportandDev, as you may already know, launched the Sport for Development guidebook, Bridging the Divide in Sport and Sustainable Development. And in this SportsLAB, the learning session, we'll get a chance to hear more from Etsuko Yamada from the Japan Sport Council and Ben Sanders from SportandDev about its practical application. I'll shortly give the word to Etsuko to get started, and Etsuko can present herself, and the same with Ben. And the same goes for the other 2 people we have joining us today, which is Cynthia Correro from Box Girls Kenya and Rhiannon Baida from Skatistan, for a conversation about some of the challenges that these 2 leading sport for development organizations faced when getting their creative ideas off the ground. And we will explore how guidance such as this new publication could perhaps have made a difference in these early stages of development of ideas and lifting them off the ground. Finally, we'll also get a chance to ask them questions about sport for development, about what they're doing and how they feel this iteration between theory, recommendations, and practical application can actually take place. Also joining us today, we have Taryn Horner from the Programs and Grants team at Laureus. She is joining us to help identify questions we can take to the panel. For a better experience, we recommend to place your settings in speaker view for this event, if this is an option on your interface for this session. Also, code of conduct. There will be some chances to engage and to have exchanges with the panel. I'll get back to that very shortly. When you do that, remember this is a safe and inclusive space for like-minded sport development organizations, for partners and for friends to talk. So please respect each other's opinions, and please also respect that we may not have all the answers to all the questions that are being asked. We will try the best we can. But just realize that this is a limited time, limited space we have for engaging. But if you do have questions for the panel, do field them in the Q&A section throughout. You should have an interface somewhere in your interface. There should be a button saying Q&A, and there you can ask questions, and Taryn will help manage that section for us. We'll note them down, and we'll ask as many as we can at the end of the presentations and panel conversation. With this said, I will immediately leave the virtual floor to Etsuko and to Ben to tell us more about the guidebook. So Etsuko, over to you.
Well, thank you, Martin, for having me here today. Let me share my slides. So we are also grateful to the Laureus Sport for Good Foundation for their kind support so far to our Bridging the Divide project as a member of the advisory committee. Hello, everyone. Today, let me briefly introduce the guidebook Japan Sport Council and SportandDev have developed. So you can access this Bridging the Divide digital guidebook on the JSC website, which provides guidance on how to use sport as a tool for sustainable development, both from theoretical and practical perspectives. It's available in English and Japanese. Some of you might wonder why our organization developed not only in Japanese version, but also English one. There are mainly 3 reasons. First, we have the basic act on sport in Japan, where 8 fundamental principles are defined in promoting sport. To promote international exchange and contributions through sport is one of them. So as a national agency, JC believes that developing this kind of guidebook could build capacity of those who are engaged in SDP field around the globe, and thus contribute to international society. And secondly, we unfortunately found out the low awareness of the SDGs in Japan. And thirdly, my work experience at UNOSDP is also related, which I will talk later. So in 2017, Japan Sports Council conducted a comprehensive survey targeting all municipalities in Japan, which are more than 1,700 entities in total, in order to grasp and analyze their local sport plans and SDP programs. Let me share some of the results. We asked sport officers in cities whether they knew the fact that sport is recognized as an important enabler of sustainable development in the 2030 agenda. And surprisingly, the gray area shows that 74% of respondents answered, I know neither the SDGs nor this fact. And regarding the obstacles to implementing SDP policies, most answered, we have no idea of using sport as a tool for development and peace. And we do not know how to take SDP policy. So there was a divide between international policy and practice at local level, as most sport officers at municipalities felt that the 2030 agenda had nothing to do with their work. So we realized the need to raise their awareness about the potential of sport for sustainable development as a tool, as well as to provide practical guidebook on how to use and take SDP policy and programs. The gap between theory and reality was also identified, which is not particular in Japan. When I worked for the United Nations Office on Sport for Development and Peace, I was mainly in charge of administering grant distribution to promote SDP projects. And when I evaluated a project proposal and project plan, there were many organizations which have a passion for sport, but do you think that a passion for sport is enough to implement an effective sport for development project? I encountered situations a lot where if those organizations had acquired knowledge and skills of project management, they would have been able to implement their SDP project much more efficiently and effectively. And which elements do you think need to be included in a project proposal and project plan? So designing phase is really important to show that your intervention meets those in need, the target population is properly identified, the program is designed based on the mechanism to bring about changes, and so on. And what do you think should be measured to show changes which are brought about through sport? So by reading our guidebook, you can find answers to these questions. So now let me share the short video which explains the overview of our guidebook.
While sport is increasingly used as a tool to enable change beyond the playing field, there remain gaps in understanding and application among policymakers and practitioners as to how sport can best contribute to sustainable development and peace. While 64% of respondents are aware of the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, most are unaware of the Kazan Action Plan, the WHO Global Action Plan on Physical Activity, and the UN Action Plan on Sport for Development and Peace. Only 38% of respondents state that the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda influence their work quite a lot or very much, while the majority feel that the Kazan Action Plan, WHO GAPA, and the UN Action Plan on SDP have nothing or little to do with their work. Respondents cite various challenges to implementing projects that use sport for development, ranging from a lack of budget, resources, and qualified personnel to limited capacity in areas such as monitoring and evaluation. The survey findings indicate that there is a clear need to build capacity to manage policies and projects using sport for development, including in areas such as how to draft a project plan, how to monitor and evaluate the activities, and how to ensure sustainability. The Japan Sport Council and the International Platform on Sport and Development have developed a guidebook to bridge the divide between policy and practice by building capacity to manage policies and programs that use sport for sustainable development. What does the guidebook include? Let us introduce some key elements now. In addition to major global sport policy frameworks, the guidebook introduces several important concepts that are relevant to sport and development, such as policy coherence and intentionality. The guidebook provides detailed guidance on how to apply policies and frameworks to programs and projects in the field with clear case studies and exemplars. The guidebook provides guidance on how to design, implement, and monitor and evaluate sport for development policies and programs, sharing key tools, resources, and examples. Checklists are also provided for relevant areas, ensuring readers can apply these learnings in the real world. Please visit the JSC's website to access the digital guidebook. If you need a hard version copy, please contact the Japan Sport Council. We hope this guidebook helps you to better manage your policy, program, or project that uses sport to contribute to development.
So it's my pleasure to share the fact that more than 1,400 people from 112 countries have used the digital guidebooks. So I really hope that our guidebook will literally bridge the divide like this. And that's all from my side. Thank you so much. Back to you, Morten.
Thank you, Etsuko. Thanks for your presentation and thanks for the video as well. Very illustrative to the aspirations of the book. Now, remember, if you have any questions to Etsuko, please do write them in the Q&A. And as I said in the introduction, we'll aim to ask some of them towards the end of the session. Now, Ben, over to you. How do you see this guide being useful for local sport for development and sports organizations?
Thanks very much, Morten, and thanks, Etsuko, for your presentation as well. And as Etsuko said, it's an honor to be here today on behalf of the International Platform on Sport and Development, sportanddev, and really delighted to further launch this guidebook that has been a 4-year project between sportanddev and the Japan Sport Council. And I will just elaborate a little bit more on how this guidebook came to be and how it can be useful for organizations in the field doing critical work on the front lines in sport for development and peace. And then, yeah, very happy to keep this short and then engage in the panel discussion and Q&A so we can hear directly from organizations like Box Girls and Skatistan, as well as from the audience on how we can make this resource work for you. So I will just share my screen. A quick overview of the presentation will just be an introduction, a little bit about sport for development more broadly, and then really talking about the guidebook Bridging the Divide that we've developed and how it can be used and applied in real life situations. So I think most people here know sportanddev, which is the international platform on sport and development. And we operate a website in English and French, as well as a number of capacity building initiatives. And as I mentioned, we've been working with the Japan Sport Council on this guidebook for many years with the assistance of an advisory council, reviewers, stakeholders, and trialists, and really delighted to see it come to fruition now. In terms of the broader field on sport for development, and this is maybe not news to many of you working in this field, but we know that the field's grown rapidly in the last 20 years in the 21st century. There's a huge diversity of actors and approaches. We've got organizations using diverse ranges of sport, diverse approaches, tackling diverse challenges, from mental health to conflict resolution. And this is both a strength and a challenge for the sector. We know that sport for development has been recognized in the 2030 agenda and in many resolutions and plans at global, regional, and national levels. However, I think it is important to note that there are no goals, indicators, or targets for sport in the 2030 agenda, with sport being recognized as an enabler of development. And if we want to take the sector forward, I think we need to push for sport to be recognized more clearly in the next iteration of global goals. We also know that besides many governments, many private actors, non-profit organizations have aligned their policies and programs to these frameworks, and while recognizing the need for context-appropriate and human rights-based approaches. However, despite this growth and emergence and some really fantastic work being done over the years, we still face a range of challenges in sport for development. These challenges have certainly been exacerbated recently by COVID and the inequities. So we know that the sector remains unequal across regions, across variables such as gender, race, disability, socioeconomic status. And we know that certain regions and organizations have more influence in terms of funding and policy processes. There's a resourcing challenge with greater constraints than ever, and this has been exacerbated by a range of crises, including the COVID pandemic and conflict and humanitarian crises. While there's a great diversity of initiatives, there's often, not always, a lack of coordination and collective impact, and limited understanding on how best sport can contribute to change, including within sport for development, the sports sector, and international development. And we know there's a significant measurement challenge linked to monitoring and evaluation and research. So this provides a real opportunity for focused capacity building, education, and training programs, so that actors can better manage policies and programs using sport for development. I think it's important to note the role here of grassroots actors and civil society, the types of organizations that Laureus funds and supports, like Box Girls, like Skadistan, because while many high-level commitments and policies have been made, I think we need to recognize the pioneering work of grassroots and civil society actors that have helped kickstart and still sustain the sport for development sector using diverse approaches and programs. There are thousands of organizations out there, some registered, some formal, but whether they classify themselves as sport for development organizations or not, there are an increasing range of actors and individuals, and both within and beyond sport, using sport-based approaches to facilitate change. And we need to ensure that these civil society actors and networks, many of whom are under-resourced, have greater capacity and tools, as Etsuko elaborated upon, to sustain and strengthen their work. So this is one of the main reasons we launched this guidebook with the Japan Sport Council. It's an open access, comprehensive guidebook to build capacity. You can download it from the Japan Sport Council website, and it was really important to us to make this guidebook open access and accessible for all, and without any charge or any restricted access. So why did we develop the guidebook? Well, research and experience has consistently shown there's a need to build capacity. This includes research conducted by the Japan Sport Council, as well as a global survey we did with the Japan Sport Council with almost 700 respondents across all 6 continents. And many key challenges were identified, as Etsuko elaborated upon, and people do not have budget or resources for such projects. They do not know how to measure such projects and find it hard to cooperate with other sectors outside sport. And the overwhelming majority of respondents and stakeholders we interviewed have indicated that support tools and resources are required to better manage projects and policies using sport for development. And most felt that there were no existing guidebooks or toolkits that met all of their needs. So this is just a brief overview of the guidebook. We encourage people to use and customize the guidebook in the way that suits them best. You may find all of it relevant. You may find certain sections more relevant than others. And we encourage you to pick and choose and use it in a way that best suits you and your organization. But we have a bit of an introduction, an overview of the guidebook, and then we look at sport policies and frameworks, the SDGs, the Kaizen Action Plan, other important international policies and frameworks, and why these sports policies and frameworks are not only relevant to governments, but also to grassroots actors and civil society. In chapter 3, we look at how can you translate policy into practice? How can these policies be relevant to one's work, and how can they translate into projects on the ground? We also look at specific attributes of sport for development and peace that may be useful, such as its youth-friendly nature or ability to bridge divides. And we cover key issues linked to human rights, inclusion, good governance, and sustainability, for example. Chapter 4 really delves into how to manage programs with practical guidance on how to plan programs, how to deliver them, and critically, how to measure and evaluate projects and programs. And it provides really practical guidelines, including self-assessment sheets, tools and resources, case studies, and what action steps are needed. And in chapter 5, we try to look, how can we advocate and move the sector forward? How can programs influence policy? How can we measure collective impact and speak with a collective voice? And how can we advocate and resource the sport and development sector so that sport can play an even more meaningful role in sustainable development? So how can this help sport for development or sport actors? And I think firstly, it's important to note that this guidebook's not only for sport for development or sport for development peace actors, but we see it as being relevant to the broader sport ecosystem, sports federations, sports structures, government, sports officers and municipalities, such as in Japan. And all those, including people in the humanitarian and international development sector that may use sport-based approaches to contribute to their work, such as the use of sport for the integration of refugees. And what we found is that while many specific manuals exist, so many sport for development actors have specific manuals using a specific sport for specific objectives, there's no overarching guidance on how to design, deliver, and evaluate diverse initiatives. So this guidebook seeks to provide some of this guidance on how to link grassroots work to international policies and to bridge this divide that Etsuko spoke about, to provide really clear guidance on program management, and to help actors better understand and advocate for their work, including the need to mobilize resources, which we know is a challenge and a real need among grassroots actors. And we really see this guidebook helping actors thinking clearly and critically about their work. So I think often in sport and in sport for development, we haven't paid enough attention to the process and to program theories and developing initiatives with clear theories of change, with quality and fidelity. We have an assumption that if we just insert sport in an environment, that a miracle will occur, as shown in the cartoon, and all of a sudden we will have positive outcomes. But the reality is sport does not automatically contribute to positive outcomes, and that sport and sport-based approaches need to be taken more seriously if they are intentionally and rigorously designed, delivered, and evaluated. So we take a targeted and deliberate approach to using sport to contribute to specific development outcomes. And in this way, we can bridge the gap between evidence and practice that many initiatives exhibit. We need to be less evangelistic about sport and more realistic about the settings and situations in which sport-based approaches can work most effectively. And in doing so, I think we can leverage the impact of the sector even more robustly. So to conclude very quickly, we know that sport for development, or the use of sport for development, has grown rapidly in the 21st century. It's used across sectors to contribute to development and peace, yet there's still a range of challenges and opportunities and inequities that exist in the sector. We've developed this guidebook to meet an identified need to build capacity and provide a resource to assist any or all actors working in the space. It is an open access resource. We encourage you to share it widely, and we recognize it is by no means perfect. And we welcome feedback on the guidebook and its application, and any ideas you may have to strengthen it in the future. And finally, a massive thanks to many people who contribute to this guidebook, to Etsuko and the Japan Sport Council, for their ongoing work, dedication, and support, to the advisory committee, including the Laureus Sport for Good Foundation and many other actors, and to all those who provided input and critical support to this guidebook. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. So thank you very much, and I look forward to engaging in the rest of the discussion. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Ben. And again, everyone, if you have questions to Ben, please do ask them in the Q&A. I can see some questions are already beginning to come in. And we'll take them, as I say, at the end of the session. I think it's very interesting to listening to you and listening to the motivation for developing this guidebook. Just to give a bit of perspective from the side of Laureus before we get to Rhiannon and to Cynthia and to hear about their experiences. A few years ago, Laureus did a piece of research across the world looking at the portfolio of partners that Laureus have been supporting. Laureus, we provide funding, we provide technical assistance in addition to hosting events like these, investing in research, creating other learning opportunities, and doing advocacy at the level of the UN and high-level stakeholders in the wider sport ecosystem. But in terms of the grant making, in terms of supporting partners, delivering programs, we did a study into our portfolio to see what are the types of programs that are being delivered, how is sport being used by organizations, and what kind of impact is being generated by these organizations. Fairly generic study, just to get an idea, and from that study came roughly 3 different modalities of using sport. There are those organizations who throw a football on the pitch and gets children or young people to play football, assuming there would be some sort of impact, some sort of social impact in the lives of the children and young people, and maybe even in their communities, but without necessarily doing anything more than facilitating sport in most often in a safe and inclusive space. And then we have the organizations that take the rule book of whatever sport they choose, throw it in the air, and adapt it to whatever social purpose they want to aim at when it comes down again, which means that netball is no longer netball as we know it. Football is not necessarily any longer football as we know it. Skateboarding is no longer skateboarding as we know it. It all becomes adapted to the social end, to the social purpose. And then finally, we have organizations who either deliver sport in a more conventional way or do throw the rule book in the air, but also complement with other types of activities around the sports-based activities. And it's quite clear that the second and the third model are the ones that are creating deeper and more lasting impact in the lives of children and young people. We can see that from the programs that we're getting. And my feeling when I read the Bridging the Divide is that it goes in and fills that space between model 1 of delivering sport and model 2 and 3, adapting sport, designing interventions to serve a social purpose or to serve an SDG purpose, if you will. And I think the reason why I'm so very fond of the work that you guys have been doing in Bridging the Divide is that it can help produce conversations and reflections in many organizations about how they can take what they're doing to the next level and start adapting it to the social end. And I think the way that it's being designed, it really hits the nail for many organizations. So hopefully many organizations out there will start using the guidebook and help bringing the entire ecosystem of sport for development further ahead. Speaking of bringing the entire ecosystem of sport for development further ahead, please let me introduce you to Cynthia Corredo from Box Girls Kenya and to Rhiannon Bader from Skadistan, both organizations that have brought sport for development light years ahead. And I've invited Cynthia and Rhiannon to join us today to hear from organizations delivering extremely successful programs on the ground. You were also new once upon a time, and I know from you, Rhiannon, from your work with the Good Push Alliance, that you're working with a lot of very young organizations as well. And I think the question is how do you feel that a guidebook like this could have been helpful for you when you started out your programs, but also to hear how it could have be helpful now, and how it can be helpful for other organizations based on the experiences that you have of getting your creative ideas off the ground in a very innovative and in a very impactful way. So my first question is to both Cynthia and Rhiannon. What are the challenges that you faced, if you're looking back, what are the challenges that you faced in sport for sustainable development within your roles at Box Girls and Skatistan respectively? And let's first go to you, Cynthia. Over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Morten, for this invitation. To Ben and Etsuko, thank you for the great presentation about the guidebook. I think I can start by saying that one of the things, if I look back 10 years ago, because I joined Box Girls, I think 11 years back as a volunteer in the start. The main challenge that we foresaw and that came into the picture was how were we going to sustain our social capital? So when I talk about social capital, I talk about the parents, because they were the initial direct targets. We were working with girls and young women, and they were below the age of 18 years old. So parental consent was very key. So at that initial stage, and since we are using boxing, and as you know, boxing, the way it is viewed in the community at that initial step was like, no, a girl cannot use boxing. It's a game of violence. How is it impacting girls? So trying to really look into how are we going to have the community buy-in, but after having the buy-in, how are we going to sustain that social capital to help us relook into our growth process, but also going into the next level? Not only the community, the parents and the teachers themselves, that was the challenge for us to see how to sustain the social capital, but also the sports was so new because it was mostly male dominated. And since our main target was trying to have girls as the frontline people, as the coaches to really implement the project and also be the coaches. Also, we lacked enough of the female the coaches to support the girls in training for the boxing and the life skill session. So for me, I think the first major challenge was that on how to really grow it, and also on how to keep with the demand from the parents, because one of the things were like, what's going to happen? What is about their safety? If they get hurt, who is going to be responsible? We didn't even have safeguarding measures in place at that time. And I think that was like one of the things. Another thing that maybe to mention was a challenge was, how are we defining our success? Because here we were like more of a passion. It's like, yes, we think there's a lot of like the violations going on within the community, and we feel like girls need to be empowered to have their stance, to protect themselves in harsh environments. But we were using boxing as an entry point, but we did not know how to really map out what is our success. Why are we going in? Yes, because we were so much, I can say, into a swimming pool full of different indicators of really what we are doing. Because if somebody asks us, what are you trying to attain at the end, is like, let girls have fun, let girls feel empowered. But we didn't realize there were some other unexpected outcomes that were really coming out in the space, but how are we trying to measure it? So when we had partners coming in at those initial stages, it was very hard for us to define even our main parameters. Which tools are we using? How are we trying to capture? And we realized we were best more of telling our stories, but how to document them and share those best practices at that initial stage was not very much evident in that the initial stages. Yeah, thank you, Morten. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. And everyone, please also do ask Cynthia and Rhiannon questions if you have questions for them. Over to you, Rhiannon. And I'm also, as I said, I'm also thinking of your role, not just with Skatistan, but with the wider Good Push Alliance that unites a large number of the world's skateboarding-based sport development programs, from very small community-based organizations to the more established ones. What are the challenges that you see organizations are facing, and that in your experience, also Skatestand were facing back in the day.
Yeah, so it kind of similar to Cynthia. I joined Skatestand originally quite a long time ago, so in 2010. And in those very early days, you know, as a new organization, you have a really steep learning curve, and there's a lot of policies, processes, just things you have to set up. And we were looking for resources, but there were very few, if any, sport for development resources that were available. So what we're doing a lot of online research, and what we were coming across was maybe more general development resources that were not as relatable in terms of the information, the examples that they were providing. So yeah, we were doing a lot of Googling and actually reaching out a lot to just our network friends and partners and whoever working at other maybe larger NGOs that were providing support. And I think Skatestand was really lucky to have a big support network, which many smaller grassroots organizations don't have. And I think also in those early days of Skatestand, we struggled a lot with convincing donors and also different community leaders of the value of sport-based youth development. So yeah, in 2008, it was a newer idea. And on top of that, you have less traditional sports like skateboarding. Also, I'm sure with boxing, as Cynthia was talking about, and this really makes it like an uphill battle to have your work be seen as legitimate and impactful. And I feel like you almost have to be like, yeah, even doing extra because there's these preconceptions that people have about the sports. So yeah, that was definitely a challenge. And for us, I mean, the kids were our best ambassadors at the time, I guess, but yeah. And then in 2018, as you mentioned, we started our Good Push Alliance, and this was the idea for this came because we had a lot of smaller, newer, very grassroots, community-based skateboarding projects popping up around the world, and they were getting in touch with us at Skatestand and asking for advice and support. And so we decided to start this alliance as a way to share the lessons that we learned in our first 10 years. And that the Good Push soon became like a knowledge sharing platform for this global skateboarding based youth development community. And now we have like a database of more than 600 skateboarding based initiatives, social skateboarding initiatives around the world in more than 100 countries. And most of these are like very, very small grassroots, most started by young people who basically have a passion for skateboarding and they want to share this with others. They've seen positive benefits themselves and believe there's potential there. So I think, yeah, in terms of resources being an important thing, that's something that we've tried to now address through our Good Push Alliance. So a lot of what we do is providing open source toolkits, templates. We have e-courses so that hopefully these smaller initiatives can kind of leapfrog over some of the common growing pains that you have when you're starting out. And yeah, we focus a lot on things related to like kind of essential internal policies, basic monitoring evaluation. We have like an annual survey that we run where we try to get an idea of where people are at. And for example, the first time we ran the survey in 2018, only a quarter of the 100 organizations we surveyed had a child protection policy in place. So we focused a lot on like providing webinars and templates and training on this topic. And now in the most recent survey, that's increased to 47%, which is still low. We have a long way to go, but these are the types of things that we've been trying to do, thinking of what challenges do we have and how can we support these newer emerging projects.
Now, all of these organizations, the 600 organizations in the Good Push Alliance, they have the benefit of having Skatestand there to provide all that support. If you think back in the early days of Skatestand, what kind of difference do you think a guidebook like Bridging the Divide could have made for you guys in terms of getting the program off the ground? Do you think it would have helped you cross some of the barriers that you were facing in trying to set it up in a more easy way, in a more efficient way, or do you think it wouldn't make much of a difference? I guess it would make a huge difference since you're providing this kind of support yourself to many of these new organizations now.
Yeah, I think, well, one thing is, I mean, the global landscape and the policies, for example, that are mentioned in the guidebook, the SDGs and the Kazan Action Plan, like these are all more recent. So at the time that Skateistan was around, we had like the Millennium Development Goals. And in general, I think for organizations like Skateistan and these smaller ones to have like something like the guide, which provides a really clear overview of like what kinds of policies and global agendas exist, and like how can, you know, how does your work potentially tie into this, and how can you maybe measure the impact of what you're doing in relation to these things, that can be really useful, because it can help you to shape things for your organization in a kind of effective way. But also, I mean, obviously for being able to speak with donors, with governments about the work that you're doing and about how it aligns with these major policies and priorities that they are probably already aware of, can really help to get much needed support, whether it's financial or, you know, having sign off on being able to do your work in the countries that you're working in. And yeah, and hopefully I think also to be able to get more of that collaboration between, yeah, different kind of levels of actors in this. So yeah, I think there's a lot that's possible. I think there's still like quite a big challenge because as was mentioned, I think by Ben, there's really like capacity gaps. So a lot of the smaller organizations are, I mean, a lot of them are one-person shows or a few people. So there's only so much that they can really do. Not everyone's going to be able to do fantastic monitoring and evaluation, but I think there's a real role that network organizations can play. So what we aim to do with the Good Push Alliance in terms of like bridging this divide to help these smaller organizations understand what exists. You know, for example, the SDGs, so many skateboarding projects are doing work that directly aligns with the SDGs, but they don't talk about it in that way. They don't like conceptualize it in that way. And so for us at the Good Push Alliance to help these organizations sort of translate that language and what they're doing into the language of the SDGs, or at least for us to be able to speak about the global community in a way that shows the kind of collective impact that we are having, even if at the real community-based level, that's not the way they're talking about it. I think that has a lot of potential, and it's something that we really want to work on with the Good Push Alliance. So we hope to do like a collective impact model next year, and I think this guide will be like really useful to refer to for that. So yeah, those are just a few things that come to mind.
Thank you, Rihanna. Cynthia, over to you. If you're thinking back on the early days, the challenges that you were facing in the community, trying to introduce a sport conventionally not associated with girls and young women at all, and trying to use it as a platform for killing off stereotypes, gender stereotypes that keep women and girls in disenfranchisement, in an extra layer of disenfranchisement in the community. Trying to set up that type of program, which clearly is trying to move the needle on very important issues, and trying to do it without having a Skateistan, without having a Japan Sport Council to guide you, or having a Ben Sanders to help design the program. What do you feel that if you had a guidebook like the Bridging the Divide in sport and sustainable development, how do you feel that could have been supportive for your efforts in the early days?
I think one of the things that I think the guidebook will really help the current grassroots initiatives, because I think grassroots initiatives using sports for development, they give their all. I'm not saying others don't give their all, but there is a tremendous effort, time, and involvement that they put into themselves. And you can really see the passion that these leaders have as they start the initiatives in place without resources, without maybe support, but they're out there really driving the change. I think it's relooking into how their passion can be translated into progressive, sustainable models that helps them into different phases. Because I realized as you start off with the sports for development initiatives, there are different phases that each initiatives go into and in terms of growth. And sometimes one can feel stuck in different phases. So I think having that process of cycle whereby they're able to understand how is this passion going to be translated and to transition to something progressive by looking into the internal process. When I say the process is which tools are within that community that are easily adaptable to the context of the initiatives at the community level that they can use, they can adapt to enable them experience that progressive process and growth that will be sustainable. And I think my other element is that when passion drives you, sometimes you don't even know how to say no. So you accommodate a lot, you bring a lot in the space. So that is whereby you find grassroots initiatives, like they say, we can have 1,000 boys and girls in the field, we can play with them. And they're like some of the key measures that are very, very essential, like safeguarding measures that sometimes you don't think of immediately. And I think the guidebook really will help to look into the checklist of different the Sports for Development initiative. Looking for me, it's how will they look into the exit strategies for participants? I think it's very, very much key because looking at the long term, I'm having participants coming into the project, coming into the initiative. What is the end goal? Because looking into the individual assessment, is there something progressive that they are putting into in place as they come into the initiative? What's going to be the end? When the time for exit, because I think we are defined with our targets and also the age gap that we're trying to reach and use the sports for development into the lives of girls and boys in our communities. But a certain time comes whereby it's time for exit. So how are the participants going to exit? Which strategies are sustainable? How are we going to involve the whole communities within our workspaces to really be involved for something sustainable? Because sometimes we lack now tracking what happens past the program initiatives that the girls and boys are involved into. So I think the guidebook is very critical because I think it's going to give the current now grassroots initiatives who are starting to understand to try and map out their 5 years. Because sometimes when you start, you're like, I'm just doing it for passion, but what's going to happen in your next 3 years? What's going to happen in your next 2 years, in the next 10 years? So envisioning that in elements such as the participants, the social capital you have, the need to scale, and also to replicate the model that you're doing within the community. Yeah. Thank you, Morten. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Now let me briefly involve Ben and Etsuko again. When you guys hear Rhiannon and Cynthia talk about the challenges they've seen and continue to see in their communities and with their partners and peers, and when you hear them reflect on the usefulness of a sport development guidebook, does this resonate with your thoughts and ambitions for the project to write up this book? Let's start with you, Etsuko.
Well, thank you, Cynthia and Rhiannon, to share the potential ways of the utilization of the guidebook based on your experience. And I think that, well, as Cynthia mentioned, that how to define the success of the project or program is really difficult for many of the participants as well. And that's why how to evaluate your project or program is also covered in this guidebook. So, and also that the comprehensive evaluation is the important point, I think. So I think that, and also that to translate language and something like can be, well, to get support or to have the collaboration with other stakeholders is also important. So in that sense that how to have the collective voice or how to have the collective impact in the sector is also covered in this guidebook. So I think, well, that could, I hope that in that sense, our guidebook could help those organizations that kind of challenges, I think. Yeah, thank you.
And Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Morten. Thanks, Rhiannon and Cynthia, for sharing your experiences and insights. I think that, organizations like Skadistan, like Box Girls, and some others, have done incredible work, and they've like trailblazed, in the sector. And I think to move forward for this sector to be sustainable and scaled, we need systems and processes, right? Not all organizations can trailblaze and pioneer away, and it's incredibly difficult, and many don't make it, or many, fail to set up systems or processes. So I think the guidebook tries to address that challenge of how can we sustain the sector in a systematic way, in a way that's scalable, right? In a way that people can use similar principles while recognizing the diversity of approaches. And this is particularly a challenge in sport for development because it does encompass such a diversity of approaches. So, speaking with a common language, maybe using common measurement tools, defining success in similar ways, so that we don't just have the individual success of some organizations in some places sometimes, but we're able to collectively quantify what sport for development organizations or organizations using sport for development are doing. So I think the guidebook does contribute to that. I think it's, I don't think it's only relevant for grassroots actors. I think it may be especially useful for grassroots actors who haven't set up such policies or programs in such a systematic way. But we did get feedback from quite well-established organizations and sports bodies, as well as NGOs, that it could be really useful for them, as well as, for example, sports officers and municipalities like in Japan or across the world who don't really understand sport for development, but do have development as part of their mandate. And I do think we need to take this conversation beyond sport for development or SDP, because there are a much, much broader range of actors and organizations that use sport to contribute to development, whether intentionally or not, whether with great focus and purpose or not, whether with great track record or not. And we hope the guidebook also helps to bridge the divide between these various sectors: sports sector, sport for development, and the broader international and humanitarian sector. And lastly, yeah, as I said, trying to translate some of these policies into language. I think a lot of organizations don't understand that they could be contributing to the SDGs, or don't understand how the work they're doing is relevant. And I think alignment and language and positioning are critical if we are to also sustain and scale this work. So I'll leave it there. I'm conscious we're short on time. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. And thanks for your reflections. I'll jump to a couple of questions that I've seen are coming up in the Q&A. And I think I'll jump to the last one first. And I think that might be a question to you, Ben. Considering we're now getting close to being halfway through the Sustainable Development Goals period from 2016 to 2030, are there any thoughts, or do you know of any thoughts on how to ensure that future goals beyond 2030 will have specific sport indicators?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that if we can collect data at scale and show collective impact, and really show that it's not just a case of a few good organizations or a few good projects, but at a national level, at a regional level, at a global level, if we can show that sport investments really make sense, and there is some evidence of this already, but if we can really scale that evidence, then I think we can make the case for investments in sport versus other approaches. So, for example, the use of sport in health promotion, there's a lot of evidence that it saves health costs, for example. And I think if we can do that, we can push for goals, targets, or indicators. Now, of course, using sport to meet goals beyond the playing field means these indicators may not necessarily only be sport related, they may be linked. But I think if there's a more clearer delineation of the role that sport-based approaches can play in contributing to other goals, and actually commitments from governments and other international organizations to put resources into these because they're cost-effective mechanisms, I think that could be a way we would be able to advocate for sport to have a much clearer role, rather than a sort of generic enabler of development and peace in which it's currently mentioned. Even though that is useful, I think that a more specific and targeted approach would result in greater investment and potentially mention within a next set of goals and frameworks.
Thank you, Ben. And Etsuko, a question to you. The Japan Sport Council what are you doing to ensure that the use of sport as an enabler is appreciated in Japan, and the sport for development practitioners have capacity to implement successful projects? Do you have any initiatives ongoing in Japan to help build the sector in Japan?
Well, so in order to ensure the use of sport as an enabler, we, Japan Sport Council, implement seminars on sport and the SDGs. And more, we are not rather just trying to raise awareness and to have more impact on the municipalities and the sports sectors as well. And so in that sense, it relates to the next question, I think. I mean that the related questions that in order to raise awareness of this, we also now creating introduction video under the theme of sport and SDGs, which is different from the video I just shared. So because it's really difficult to explain the relationship between the sport and SDGs from the theoretical perspectives. So I think it's a good way to just share the, well, just a short video, something like that.
It's also a growing sector in Japan, sport for development. And I think the Japan Sport Council and the guidebook plays a quite critical role in helping to conceptualize the whole idea of using sport for social change. And at Laureus, we're certainly also doing our part together with Nike in the Play Academy with Naomi Osaka program that aims to empower girls and young women through sport and to increase the participation of girls and young women through sport. There was another question as well, which I think is for both of you, Ben and Etsuko, which is about measuring the impact of the guidebook. I know that you're already doing a survey right now, and that you're interested in hearing from organizations. So what are your plans in terms of seeing how this book has been used and how it is being used across the sector? Over to you, Etsuko.
So we are planning to have the follow-up surveys targeting the leaders of these guidebooks in a few months. And as I shared, we also counted the numbers of readers, of course, but it's not enough, we understand. So what we really need to grasp is that what kind of changes or impacts our guidebook will have created for those who have used it. So we are trying to grasp that kind of changes and outcomes by conducting the surveys. So I would like to ask all the leaders to cooperate to that questions in future. So that's our plan right now.
Yeah, we will certainly from Laureus will help get the questionnaire out to everyone participating in these sports labs, but also through our network. Together, obviously, with a link and a suggestion for them to use the book, the guidebook going forward. Conscious about time, I can see that we are heading to the end. I can see there are still some questions left in the Q&A. We will pick them and try to figure out a way of responding to them, either via our social media or maybe suggest that some of them are taken to other sessions that we plan to host in the future, among other around impact indicators on sport for development and other issues around it, which might not necessarily connect directly into the guidebook, but which is still important questions to discuss for the sport for development sector. So let's quickly run to the end. Many of you are already beginning to log out. probably have other things to do since we're already passing the time. But before we close, let me just thank our speaker for taking the time to join us today. So thank you to Etsuko and the Japan Sports Council, and thanks to Ben and sportanddev. Thanks to Cynthia and Fox Girls Kenya and Rhiannon and Skatistan. Thank you very much to you as well. And thanks to all of you for connecting today and listening into this Laureus SportsLAB session, learning session on bridging the divide in sport and sustainable development. And I won't close down without doing a little advertising as well. So for those interested, we will be hosting another SportsLAB, Laureus SportsLAB learning session on the 18th of November, where we will discuss the international safeguards for children in sport. And there we'll be joined by UNICEF, by Norman Brook Sport Consulting and Tackle Africa to discuss different aspects around the international safeguards. And we will also have a colleague from Laureus Germany join us in that conversation. So keep an eye out for invitations in your inbox, or check Laureus on our LinkedIn, where we'll post the information on how to register or how to access the next session. Before we're off, Cynthia, Rhiannon, Ben, or Etsuko, any last words? Otherwise, thank you very much to everyone, and thank you to the panel for joining us, and thank you to Taryn for sitting solidly in the background and ensuring that everything has been going smoothly and well throughout the session.
Thank you, everybody,
Thank
for your
you.
time. Much appreciated.
Take care,
Thanks.
everyone, and have a lovely day and a lovely rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.